She said to my sister-in-law, "I love you like I could never love a daughter."
Well,
I think I can only look not back, but look at today and forward. I'm so proud of who and where you are.
today I have a smile on my face ear to ear, and that's because I've had my twin brother, I've had my dad, and now I get the pleasure of my mom on the Alex Perry on Fire podcast.
How lovely.
And I want to set the stage for this because today is not about me and how you raised me. As I sit in this chair, I couldn't be happier where I am. And that's from my bloodline, which is your lineage, the way you've raised me, the way you've raised our brothers, family, etc. Has it been perfect? No. Would you want it to be perfect? No. But it has been incredible. And again, I sit here with a smile on my face, introducing my mom, Josefine Perry. So welcome to the Alex Perry on Fire podcast.
Thank you. Very proud to be here.
Well, and if you're not watching and just listening, you'll hear my mom is of British descent and has an accent that you'd be surprised I can't hear most of the time. And with pride, I say it, she is put together today, but that's not for the podcast. I think you take great pride in the way you look on a daily basis. And I notice it. I think other people do because they always say your mom is, because they're not from England, like the Queen. So let's get to it. If you could kind of tell us about your upbringing.
Oh, I come from the north of England where people are pretty blunt and basic and honest. My parents had moved there after the war to a very small town that was on the border of beautiful dales, scenery, and the edge of an industrial belt. Small town. My father was very, very successful and a very, very good man, both in business and as a father. He was wonderful. My mother was very remote. She had moved from being a favorite daughter in an upper middle class family in Germany to a probably very tough situation in the north of England, and I think found it extremely difficult. Not warm at all. I have two older brothers. In England, boys got sent to boarding school not as punishment but as privilege at age eight, which is barbaric. So I was pretty much alone at home. And all of my memories are with my father, doing things with him, going places with him, going to the factory, walking, just local, nice, gentle memories. I went to boarding school, which was considered privilege. Both my brothers also went to boarding schools, and we were lucky to be in a very welcoming Quaker environment in a beautiful medieval town of York, a walled city. And I can't speak for them, but for me, I did love it. It was very nice. And that's basically my beginnings.
Well, yeah, and taking back a little bit further, because you said you left, but you didn't quite explain that. So where did your dad leave?
My father and mother had left Germany about 5 years before the war. My mother was from a middling religious Jewish family. My father from generations of not religious but very educated. And he had been the director of a handbag company and was made a director in London. And he offered his services in some way to the British government. And during the war, because of his sewing machine experience, he was offered by the government a choice of factories, one in the north of England, one in Scotland, to make webbing equipment for the Allies. And that was the start of a business that ended up being luggage, cosmetics, handbags, slippers, an awful lot of things from a very small beginning in Yorkshire.
And so I guess they moved from Germany
to London first, and then to the north.
And you were born?
In Yorkshire.
So, and at that time, how many years had they been in the UK?
I think about 10 or I was born in 46, so 10, 11 years. They could not change their names and had to report to local authorities until well after the war, which is surprising.
Do you think that your father embraced that more than your mother?
My father was so proud to be accepted in England and loved absolutely everything about it. I think my mother had a much harder time.
Because her roots were more German?
German, small town, eldest daughter, a little spoilt, lost a sister to the Nazis during the war. They came to Holland and took her. I can't imagine what that experience was like. Like many, many others, the family was all over the place. Her parents and her one sister moved to America. She was in England, and relatives and everything just dispersed by the war.
Okay, and then you grow up in the UK, which you said you quite enjoyed to your recollection. Did you
Until I
enjoy
was about
boarding
17.
and boarding school you enjoyed?
I always, we think back now we're older, I was always lonely and I was always insecure. But yes, I did enjoy boarding school. I loved the city. I loved scenery. I liked all the arts. I was useless at anything that could help me go any further. And my parents thought, oh, isn't she wonderful? She can paint, but so could every girl. And then sadly, they didn't encourage me to go for higher exams and go to university. I went to art school in Dusseldorf, which was quite amazing, but I think they only kept me because I was only there for a term. And then I went to Paris to art school, where I couldn't even find the school where my parents came, but I had a wonderful time. And then I went on to a very small college for copywriting, and I became a copywriter for products like toilet paper and Bird's Eye and things like that for Unilever.
And then I'm fast forwarding, but it gets to the point of some of the audience has heard my dad, your husband's podcast, and how interesting he is. Will you share how you met him?
Oh, my. Yes. My husband had gone first to meet my father in the north of England to make luggage for Fred Perry. And we couldn't because at the time we had the rights to Adidas or Adidas, as you call it. But your father fell in love with my father and with my brothers. And at the time I was 27. Now, in those days, that was considered on the shelf or past your sell-by date. Anyway, they recommended to this very, very charming American that he look me up in London. And he did. And I don't know what I expected. Probably someone tall and getting out of a sports car. And I looked out of my window in conservative London, and there was John Travolta. He had on tight white trousers. He had a nylon shirt open nearly to the waist. He got out of a station wagon, and he walked into my house and called me sweetie. No one had ever called me sweetie in 27 years. In fact, no one's called me that since, I don't think. But he was so nice. He had the bluest of blue eyes, which later on people commented on. Brilliant blue eyes. I only learned quite a bit later on that they were actually contact lenses. They weren't
I
his.
actually I didn't know that. I thought he had naturally blue eyes still.
Well, they were very blue and so blue that everyone noticed. But we had one of those amazing first dates where we went to a restaurant and closed the place at 1:30. And then, a surprise, surprise, he lived in America. I lived in London. We actually had 4 dates that took place over a few weeks, and we got engaged. And he got so drunk the night of our engagement that he forgot my name.
But you kept the engagement.
He went back to, we got engaged in Marbella. We came home 2 days later to the north of England to see my parents. And in fact, your father wore in this tiny small town a turquoise suit with orange piping. And my mother looked at him. She'd never met him before. And she said, I think I need to change the dinner reservation. He went back to America to tidy things up to move to England. So we got engaged in, I forget, right at New Year's, and we got married in June.
As he says before he could change his mind, which wasn't very nice, right?
I'm not sure where that came. I think putting something very serious on it, it was perfect timing for both of us. I didn't think twice. He liked me for who I was. He made me laugh. He allowed me to become more secure in a person. And he loved everything about England, and his parents were basically English. And I think just for both of us, it was the right stage of our life and very good timing.
What did you think about him being Fred Perry's grandson with that notoriety? Did that...
Well, he wasn't his grandson. He would have been his son.
Oh, excuse me. I was his grandson. Excuse me.
Yeah. I knew from the very, very beginning that his original name was David Friedman, that he had a father in California and a stepmother who he never saw. He hadn't seen his father from when he left with his mother, and that Fred had not been a father figure, but had been a very good, steady, sturdy influence in his later life. So he told me everything from the get-go. And I subsequently met his real father and absolutely loved him.
But being Fred Perry's son,
yes,
at that time, was that of any interest to you, or did that, I don't want to say play into anything, but obviously, that would have come with some notoriety.
Funnily enough, it didn't mean that much to me. We were a tennis-playing family. One of my brothers played county tennis. We always had gone to Wimbledon. Fame didn't really bother me at all. I got to understand it more once we were married, and we would be with Fred at events where he was so adored by a public. And in actuality, his mother was even as loved as Fred was, because she was wonderful to everybody. She took care of people. She was godmother to people. So no, one, it didn't impress me. And secondly, he didn't like me. He didn't really want much to do with family. At an engagement party at a very pucker New York club, I was one of two ladies. And he introduced me and he said, I don't so much feel I'm gaining a daughter-in-law. I feel I'm getting rid of a very expensive son. That was his take. But he was a wonderful man to the public, a really wonderful man to the public.
I get it, but it's funny you say that because you almost dismissed something that was incredibly insulting.
Oh, it was. It was very insulting to me.
That you still have not forgotten.
No.
And yet after you say it, you want to say something nice about him.
Because he really was. He would go to the ends of the earth for Mr. Joe Average. He never tried. At that era, you didn't earn money. You were with royalty, you traveled, you got incredibly beautiful trophies. And he'd had a hard time. He was the son of a labor minister, and tennis was a very upmarket pucker thing, and the British treated him pretty shabbily. And he was a North of England man. And as I say, we North of England people are we call it the way it is.
Yeah. And I think we've established now up to the point where you've met our dad, my dad,
yes.
Your husband. I think where I'm going to change gears a tiny bit, and it's interesting. I was talking to a girlfriend of mine the other day, one of my best friends, girlfriend, and she had mentioned that, she was introducing my friend Andrew to her family, and he was being more inquisitive and asking questions that she had never asked her parents. And I said, I'm actually doing a podcast on Monday with my mom, and there's some questions that I'd been thinking about that I had never, ever asked you. And I think some of it is maybe subconsciously you don't want to know about it, or there's deeper things to it, or there might be some hurt behind it. And I say that because I want to learn from today and learn from certain things. And I think the first question I'd ask you is, Dad came on here and said he didn't want kids necessarily. Is that something you wanted right away once you all got married?
Oh, he talks a story. I don't think it was any deep thought at all. He did say at the age, after horrifying me, he did say at the age we were at, you got married and you assumed you would have children. It didn't really enter the thought process that you wouldn't have children. And for all he might have come across as a little selfish saying that, he was very good to me where I was insecure and very lonely, single. When I was with him, because he was flamboyant and outgoing and people loved him and he did all of that, he allowed me to become my own person and very, very, very different.
But did you want a family right away?
We didn't think about it
was
in
just
those
how
days.
was that?
It's just how it was. Your eldest brother, we never knew that he was a quite difficult baby until we had the three of you within 17 months, and you were so easy. When we took him for school testing, we were told that he was borderline gifted and borderline overactive, which explained so much for me as why I didn't have much control over him or wasn't able to influence him much. And then there was a 4 3/4 year gap between him and and Dominic, your second brother.
And as we've talked on the show a lot about patterns, and I'll bring it up. Were you cognizant of the way you wanted to be a mother from the way you were raised?
No, and you didn't think about it then. Now, going back, especially since your twin went to rehab, you think an awful lot about what you did and how you did it. I did know that being in Beverly Hills or where we were, I found bringing up children completely different to anything I thought of. And the reason for boarding school for you was in part because I didn't like an awful lot of what I saw there. It may not have been just there. It may have been the era of parents and children, but there was an awful lot that I found very difficult to accept.
And I want to backtrack because to make sense of that, you and our dad were living in London, but you moved.
We moved because...
And where did you move
We
to?
moved in part with... Very difficult for me because I was very attached to my father, who was very ill, did not live that much longer. Harold Wilson was Prime Minister in England at the time, and your father's company had just started to make some very good money. The tennis shoe business was booming, and with little to do, he was earning good money. Harold Wilson wanted to tax foreigners on their income, regardless if they remitted it to the country. And we were encouraged in part to move to America. And your father went and looked at Brockton, Massachusetts, which was where the shoes were being made. And I said, I think I can do that, or live on the coast of Maine year round. And then he took me to Miami, to the tennis club there, where the men smoked cigars and had gold chains, and the women came out in $200 dresses with every new racket and long nails and couldn't hit a ball. And water wasn't for me. I liked hills. And then he came home one day from a trip and he said, I just rented us a house in Beverly Hills, where he'd been born.
So, yeah. So was that culture shock to you then to move from London to Beverly Hills or Los Angeles?
No, it was, I didn't think twice about it. It was an adventure. I didn't know anybody, not one person. Didn't have a bank account, couldn't ring things up without cash. It just was an adventure. There was nothing I didn't like about it.
But you didn't really understand the ways of the U.S., especially when it came to raising kids.
Yes, that was a little bit later when you were all in school. A couple of, for instances, I didn't like the way mothers did all the homework for the children so that they got A's all the time. One, I'm not bright enough to do your homework, but two, I didn't want to. I didn't like the way the parents did the science projects so that the children won the science award. And in fact, the school actually said to the parents, please don't do it. At Christmas Carol concerts, the parents would come to the front row with cameras in front of you to photograph their child singing and then leave the whole performance. It was at sports events. They cheered their child on, not the team. All of that was extremely alien to me. And then the choice of schools, you were at private schools, which I loved and I would have done again. The choice of schools was very, very small. So I wanted you to have, I think now at your age, you all thought it was a little cold that you went away. The reasons were very positive.
Yeah, and I wouldn't necessarily argue that, but I would say that from your upbringing and where you were born to an American upbringing.
I didn't know anything about an American
But would you
upbringing.
say, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but coming from a Germanic mother and father to a Los Angeles society, what besides doing homework would have been the biggest difference?
You don't know. I mean, I just had a lovely full life. All of a sudden there were 4 of you. We had some point we had 6 pets. I did work, even though I know you're not so sure, but I did work. Your father was gone all the time. Life was busy. It was fun. I had a lot of Scandinavian girlfriends who had been airline stewardesses who'd married American men, who were wonderful wives, homemakers, mothers, traveled. I loved it. It was just it was a very, very pleasant life there in the 70s. Really lovely. Westwood, where UCLA was lovely. Going to Santa Barbara was beautiful. Going to San Diego. It was an easy life. It was a full life. And I tried very hard to join all the school committees to learn how things functioned.
But in the beginning of the episode, you said you were extremely close with your father and pretty dismissive of your mother.
Not dismissive. There was just no warmth from her ever, and I was a little intimidated by her. I can't remember one hug, one tucking me into bed, or one good night, one packing my suitcase. I remember her showing up at boarding school looking very glamorous and people being nasty to me because she was elegant and they came in a good car. I mean, things like that. I just don't remember any closeness at all. In fact, on her deathbed, with a little German accent, I think without really meaning it, she said to my one wonderful sister-in-law, "I love you like I could never love a daughter."
Well,
I think she meant like a daughter, but she didn't say that.
You laughed that off. That obviously would stick with you growing up.
Yes, I think, first of all, I go back to saying I think not until my age when your children are grown up and you've had some issues, and I think most people at some point have some dysfunction or issues, that you go back into your childhood, you look at it, you just go day by day and get on and do, and you are who you are. You don't look at it till your children bring it up to you, or you see other friends with grandchildren and you see things and you start reflecting back.
But also maybe because that was the way of the times, and that's the patterns we're trying to break, is that you were told, move forward, don't take it personally, this is the way it is. But naturally, you would never want a mother to feel that way about a daughter or say that, right?
I think most mothers and daughters that I've met are more like best friends. And they talk to each other all the time. In our family, and I think in most families, a mother-son relationship that's normal is just not quite that fuzzy, and you sort of let your boys go a little bit and don't sit on them.
Do you think that your mom was jealous of the relationship you had with your dad?
I couldn't answer that. She had a very nice life. She went to America once a year. She traveled. She had jewelry. The holidays were beautiful. No, I think she was glad he did what he did with me when he did it. So she didn't need to.
What do you think was the reason that your mother really, as it sounds like, didn't favor you?
I think it was a very different upbringing from what she was used to. She had 2 sisters. They were relatively small time, but well off. She, being the eldest, was spoiled. Do not forget, my brothers went away to school age 8. They really weren't there other than for holidays. And on holidays, my father made sure they played tennis, they played golf, they did. My mother wasn't around them that much. They, in speeches, give her credit for being the strong backbone, the Germanic backbone that must have given them some of their business drive and everything. I was alone at home with her. Pots and pans would fly around the kitchen. Our little housekeeper would cry. And I just wanted to bake and be there and do. And I'd sit in one room, she'd sit in another room. We would never think. I went to other people's homes and loved the fact that they had sandwiches at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and they played and I was alone at home. So, but was it conscious in my upbringing of you? No, it wasn't a conscious thought until so much later.
But subconsciously, I'm
Maybe.
smiling. You were our backbone. You were our Germanic backbone. So,
but I hoped I was more than that. But I couldn't think of it in those terms until we get to this sort of age and go back over it.
But then how do you think it related to how you raised 4 boys seeing your mother like that?
Well, I can only look at today and say I'm really thankful because of the 4 of you. I don't need to spend your inheritance. You're doing a pretty good job on your own. I think I can only look not back, but look at today and forward. I say it with nothing but I'm so proud of who and where you are. So somewhere along the way, you have mastered what didn't work.
We will say something about someone that we don't necessarily like. And quite quickly, we replace it with a reason that they're the way they are or something that diverts attention from it. You've actually done it a couple times in the podcast already. And so I'm going to repeat the question. Why do you think your mother was the way she was?
I think she was a party animal who liked to have some attention and be pretty and be well-dressed and be important. And I think she moved to a situation where she was none of those things, where it was all about my father. And she was a very willing participant in having Pakistani students one weekend, Indian students the next weekend, doing the things that helped my father. But she was lost, and she was secondary, I think, to what was there, and she felt trapped at home. She didn't make friends. She just was so very different to what had been there. I think having had someone who did ironing on a Friday and laundry on a Monday, she loathed the fact that she had 16 shirts that had to get washed and ironed, even though she had help. I think she wanted out of that and to be able to live full-time the glamour life that my father gave her on holidays and her trips to America.
And do you think you could honestly say that you didn't think there might be any jealousy that that was the life your father was giving you?
No, it was so very small what he was giving me. He was taking me and doing things with me when she didn't want to. A Saturday morning to go to the local delicatessen, a Sunday morning walk, wind, hail, snow, where she was cooking a meal and she was at home. She could have come with us. She didn't want to.
But were you getting the attention that maybe she craved from him?
I couldn't answer that. I have no idea.
Or would you not, and I don't mean to pry, would you not want to think that?
No, I think later in life she had more envy when she saw what fun I had, how much we laughed, who we introduced her to in LA. I think it came later that she was envious.
Would you say that your dad and mom had a good relationship?
Not at all.
What did you say? Should they have been married?
Oh, they lived through a war, which none of us have done, and they lived through persecution.
But I didn't ask that.
Yes, I think like Mrs. Fred Perry, like being Mrs. Fred Perry, regardless what went on. Many people we know who are happy to be called Mrs. Something and don't want to look too closely at what their spouse is or has been doing, but they've brought up their children, made a life, and are very content to be what they are. I think it's more that. It's an accommodation.
And so that was the relationship?
As I knew it when I was older.
Yeah, of course, because as a
Yes.
younger age, you would note.
From the age of about 10 on,
Yeah.
12 on, yes.
And is it at all interesting that you found yourself in a similar relationship?
I taught your father to fight. He was so gentle and he never wanted an argument. And sadly, I taught him how to do it. And he's very good at it now. I think we have you all in common who we absolutely adore. We have a love of animals in common. He does make me laugh. He's wonderful with people. He's made friends in a five street block during COVID with people. And the other big thing is to remember, because I very much worried about coming on the podcast and being able to offer anything to anybody, because I have not had a life of hardships. They have been minor. I haven't been financially burdened by everything. But the bottom basics come back to the same things. We're healthy. Think about that. No one's gone through mega illness. We haven't gone through a war as a family. You haven't gone off to war. COVID is the worst thing probably you've experienced in your lives, or for us.
I smile because what you said is just an incredible amount of gratitude for where you are, which is heartfelt, but it's also incredibly coping. You have gone through a lot. Trust me. I could go through your story, losing your dad and not saying goodbye a day before, having certain relationships with your brother, having a husband who was not the easiest of husbands, who was obviously loving and caring, but not the easiest, sending 4 boys to boarding school at age 12, moving to 6 different places with those kids at certain times, and putting a smile on your face of having a mother that's been incredibly difficult and not really a mother to you. Your mom didn't teach you a certain way. You just said that. I mean, she wasn't overly warming and loving like a mother would normally be. So you had to learn on your own for that.
Well, I know in talking to all 4 of you, or to you, you saw that as a pattern with me, which really horrified me to a point. Your father always came home and did fun stuff with you and did evening stuff. And I was wiped out by the time evening came with 4 of you and different this, that, and the other. So I was very happy to let him be that person. I wasn't sporty and adventurous, and he took you and did all sorts of stuff like that. But by the time you went away to school, I really felt I'd put in good, bad choices, this. I loved you just as much. I just didn't want to be a mother who crowded you. You all saw that as distant and not loving. It was never meant. Our lives revolved around you. My life revolved around you all.
And I would backtrack on that. I never saw it as distant. In fact, I think we all kind of knew a little bit. And as we reflect back, you had to be hard on us, because anyone who's seen the episode with Dad or has met
I was the wicked witch of the West.
We would have eaten peanut butter and never been picked up from school and got
He nearly killed you the one day he drove you to school. There was a dumpster coming round the corner.
And so, yeah, unfortunately or fortunately, I actually gave you credit. Oop, you're fine. And said, look, someone had to be that force with us and had to give us a little bit of structure, and you were forced into that role. Do you think that a little bit of that was that?
I do want to say it wasn't a very warm household, because your father was so very different and I was so very frustrated. And I look back on how all 4 of you handled it. I think you were always giving, helpful. You don't want to talk about you, but in 2nd grade, at parents' night, on the wall, you had to write a little essay about what you were good at, and you wrote, "I'm a very good visitor." You were happy, you were helpful, whatever. Elliot, your twin, was less secure than you. If you were ill, he didn't want to go to school, but if he was ill, you'd go. Dominic was Mr. Charm School. He never did homework. He hid stuff. He was so different. He was athletic. He was your father in miniature, but with strong principles he breezed through. And Matthew had a very tough time. He was so much older, and we loved him equally, but he was like bringing up two families. But in fairness to all of you, there was a lot of arguments that you heard at home that in retrospect, I wish you hadn't. And we also had a lot of help because of the animals, because of work, because of everything. And I always wanted someone young and attractive to be looking after you when I didn't have the energy. But I got worried that they got too close. So we went through in rapid fire a slew of young ladies who came. And that was very disruptive, I think, for some of you.
And just out of curiosity, why would you want someone that was young and attractive?
Because I didn't think I was, and I was tired. I never thought that your father would fancy someone but I just wanted someone young with energy who would go and do and be more of a friend to you than I could be.
Yeah, and I want to backtrack a little bit because I think you've said it, in retrospect and looking back, we can make changes, of course, right? Now, there's also been way more good than bad, and that's just life. If you're dealing with someone who lives on kind of two opposite ends of the spectrum, we had our father who was...
Did you think he was so different when you were young?
You don't know. You're confused by it, right? Obviously, Dad would walk into the room and say, I know you're right, your mother's wrong, but just admit it so you can come out and hang out. As a child, that's very confusing.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Would be very confusing, as opposed to just saying, we're on the same page with your mother, right?
Yeah.
You block out some things, right? I can admit when Elliot, and I don't like the word rehab, which you used, Elliot went for treatment, wellness, mental health treatment.
I'm sorry.
No, and it's fine. And he came out of it and he's stronger. There was some animosity towards you.
Quite correct animosity from his point.
A lot of it he related to his childhood. And we all deal with our childhood differently, as you've dealt with your childhood. And you're never too late. And that's what some people even said with Dad's episode. One person called me and they're like, the thing I loved most about that is he admitted it's never too late, which as a child you appreciate because it's never too late. Until you're gone, it's not too late. And that's why I shared stuff with you that I was learning from Elliot and from myself. And you grow from it because I also learned there weren't things that you knew that you could possibly know. How many times do parents say, I had no clue about this? And you do the best you can. And I think you've done an incredible job. That's not about it. The question is just learning from the patterns and breaking those patterns. A European lifestyle family is going to be different than growing up in Los Angeles. It's going to be very different. And so there is a little bit of, I would just say, grace to understand that was going to be different. And that's okay. It shapes you, right? I guess the question for you is, for four boys growing up and now where you are, what do you think that you did right? Because you did a lot right.
I actually think a key thing I did right was boarding school and was letting you go. I trusted you to be good. I trusted you that we'd put good things into you. I didn't realize I came and visited, but I was visiting 3 different schools. We didn't come that often. I would repeat that. It's from the west coast of America, sending a child to boarding school is considered the parents are either getting a divorce or the children are delinquent.
Well, and to set the tone, London is the size of Connecticut, and we went from Los Angeles to Massachusetts, which is very different.
Absolutely. I think maybe because of my European experiences, I didn't want you to grow up in one fishbowl. I thought it would be lovely for you all to be in a rural setting, because I thought none of you were going to be doctors, or you were all probably going to be in trade or in business somehow and would be in bigger cities later in life. So those were some decisions that I would actually repeat again. I would not repeat the arguments that we had at home and the obvious disconnect that the two of us had. We're together because your father stayed. And I was no picnic some of the time. So let's make that crystal clear. I think or many of your podcasts, a lot of what we're saying is today, I genuinely believe that from dysfunction or not normal, it is normal, and you must grow and you must appreciate it. And yes, you have regrets. Hopefully, you can tell your grandchildren, or now you can tell your children what you did that you didn't think was right, that you wouldn't like to see them repeat. But you have that luxury of growing. And I think you starting your podcast and going through what your twin brother went through this year and seeing marriages where things are dysfunctional or hadn't worked and those that do, you're learning all the time. You're moving on all the time, and it must be that way.
Yeah, and I appreciate and love that because that's the idea behind it and the openness to it. And when I first started the podcast, and especially that first episode, which was very, very open, vulnerable, what was your initial reaction to that?
First, I have to just take that it was your first podcast and I found it terribly long. I don't mean that nastily. I'm unused to watching something for 40 minutes that isn't entertainment. I found it very good for being your first podcast. I found it amazing for people to listen to because I've always thought that saying it out loud is helpful, bottling it up isn't. And I thought that what Elliot did for the people who listen to your podcast by saying things, by the two of you having a dialogue, you had an audience that you never dreamt you could have. It gave them, in my opinion, the ability to open up a little bit or to say, me too. That's what I got out of the first one.
But was it hard hearing the struggle that he'd been through?
No, I knew it all. I had actually wanted to take action way before, and all of you said, until Elliot wants to get help, we can't do it. It was breaking my heart to see some of the things, and there again, men, your father, didn't really want to see it. He wanted to jolly along, and we also, as adults, with you as adults, had a tougher position doing something. But there were a few things that made it crystal clear that this was not good any longer. And I couldn't do anything about it. So I knew a lot more once he came home and talked to me about his childhood and how it had upset him. Then I really began to understand. And I was a little angry that the therapists talk so much about the past, because at the time I thought, oh, forget it. It's the past. Come on, be bigger, be about now, grow, learn from it. But I realize how important it is and what a big step it is to get over those things that somehow came back to haunt you.
Yeah, and I think even for yourself, what is, and why I share it with you is if you went deeper and really asked the questions, this is why I asked the questions to you and Dad, and they're questions that we have not asked or talked about, and I'll give some, but in order to move on and grow, you have to go back and understand that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what Elliot learned. I learned that from Elliot. I had to ask Elliot and learn, okay, I've got to go back a different way, different form, and go and ask you very hard questions that we sat down and I was like, I want to know this about the family, about our German background, because it shapes you. Our German background, escaping Nazi Germany sticks with your blood. There's, I would think a lot of mental anguish from having to leave your country, being forced out of your country.
They weren't. They left before that. In all honesty, families suffered, of course, terribly. And there was a stigma of being German. There was a stigma of being Jewish, even if you were the most wonderful person on God's earth. But it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy. And it was a different language. It wasn't as if you were going from England to America. But my father and his brother, both of whom won honours from the Queen, Order of the British Empire for services to industry, and it could just as well been services to humanity, wanted out, wanted a different life, wanted to belong in a different country.
But as we talk about dealing with certain stuff, as you said it, and again, I'm saying it here now because we've never asked this. So I think what's incredible is I will ask you, and this is not a difficult question. You have expressed how much you loved your father. It's seen on you when you talk about him. But when he passed away, do you think you probably dealt with that in the right manner?
Oh, it was pure heartbreak for me. Your father had been to England about a month before and said, "You must go." And I didn't want to frighten him by getting on the next flight and going, and I missed him by a day. He's still in my life 30-something years later. When I do something wrong, I see him shaking his head at me, and oh, God, no. I mean, he thought I was the bee's knees. I sang at the piano. I can't hold a tune to save my life. I sang with him when he came home. He played the accordion, the drums, the piano, played chess, played bridge, painted. Lousy golfer. He had a slip disc as a result
I'm
of
stopping
it.
you now. I'm emotional because I've never taken that on. I mean, you can kind of feel the hurt of missing him by one day.
But, if you were to talk to both my brothers, who are both extremely different, my eldest brother suffered from being the eldest son in a new country. And he said, all my father did was shake his head at him. Oh, no. Oh, no.
Yeah.
And then my second brother, who was very, very bright, did so well, was another animal. But how they would see my father is very different to how I do.
But as a coping mechanism, right? I only say it, we just talked about it, missing him by one day. And you quickly move on to something that isn't hurtful. That must be hurtful.
One last thing. There were hundreds of people at his memorial service, hundreds of people. He gave livelihoods to more people than I can tell you. One of the speeches talked about, I went to him one time and asked for something. And my brother said, well, she's never needed to ask for anything because she's always had it. That was at his memorial. I'd never forget that.
Yeah. So you found ways to cope with the sudden loss.
Funnily enough, I was more lost when my mother died. I had been to England 4 times that year and was with her when she died. And I went into sort of a depression afterwards. I think in part, not regrets, because there was nothing there. The void and the realizing that you're the older generation now, you're it. There was a huge void and I couldn't understand why. And I can't say it was regrets.
Yeah. But
And she was stoic. I mean, she was quite a lady.
Yeah. And I understand all that and I won't press too hard, but there is an obvious hurt still there or miss, or there's some part of it. And I think maybe also some of it, I don't want to put into your words, but we didn't get to experience him. So.
Oh, he would have had favorites, but he would have really loved you.
Yeah. So
he has cars in common with you.
Well, and going back a tiny bit, because we talked about Elliot, we've talked about Dom, and we have another brother named Matt. A lot of people do not know this, but we have another brother, an older brother named Matt. And he had a difficult upbringing and a difficult life, really, for a long time. And you had to deal with that as well. And I only set the stage of, as a parent, and asking you questions. And I'm going back to this fact. There are some questions I've already asked you today that I've never asked. I think part of it is almost a coping mechanism not to be hurt or to understand your hurt, because some of it is hurt, and hurt's not necessarily a bad thing. We just talked about releasing it and also understanding more of where you can't come from comes from talking about it. And so I guess as a parent to 4 boys, and people are listening, and 4 boys is a lot, right? And one thing I've learned is you were an incredible boys' mom. We absolutely loved you, and we loved what you did. You let us go and run and enjoyed sports and time with our dad, and then you were there for us. So much good of it. There was so much love. I would never pretend that there wasn't a lot of love in our house. There wasn't a lot of "I love you."
We never said it.
but we knew there was still love.
I'm glad to hear that.
Keep you in the room. And nothing taken too seriously. But things do get serious, right?
It is serious, and it is real issues. And of the four of you, the one who should have the most animosity is your eldest brother, because he was so different. And probably the German streak in me is a little control freakish. And when you have a child where logic doesn't come in and you can't control. Am I allowed to tell one story against myself?
Yes.
Your eldest brother and I were like this, and I should have been bigger than it because I was his mother. But I came home one day from a big lunch or something, and I was in really high heels. And your eldest brother was on the floor in his bedroom doing something. Anyway, I lost it. I got really furious. And I came within an inch of treading on him with a heel. And I walked out of the room sobbing. I mean, I really, really did. It was sort of like the last straw. And I decided, and I was very against psychiatry. I thought, solve your own problems. I'm never going for help. I'm not going to read help books. I'm not going to do it. I went to a wonderful young man who not only saw me, he saw your eldest brother and had said to me at some point, there's nothing wrong with him, really. But he said one sentence to me, which gave me a life for those years. He said, what makes you think it's your fault? One sentence. I don't know if I could have gone on. And I always said to your eldest brother, if ever he goes for help, please talk about how bad your relationship was with me. Please talk about it. It'll help you.
It's incredible because I can't tell you how many times I told Elliot in his worst of worst, it's not your fault. And it's not your fault. And it's to the point where it's kind of what we said. The way you were raised, what's in your blood, your patterns, they are what they are. And you only know what to do, how you've been told. And so that was foreign to you raising your firstborn.
What I got as a result of being married to your father. Oh, by the way, I never mentioned that I have 4 children, 3 grandchildren, and a Great Dane, my family. But what I got as a result of your father was the ability to become myself and to be more of what I wanted to be. I was floating until then. I was, as I said, relatively insecure and lonely. But because we were so different, you know, we maybe balanced each other, but I was able to have the principles and the toughness.
But I would imagine most mothers would ask, you've got 4 boys.
Yes.
Who you love, who you take to soccer practice.
When I got pregnant with you and you two, your father said, what are you going to do about it? And then he changed the phrase and said, what are you going to do about it?
Most mothers would not send their 4 boys to boarding school thousands of miles away.
No.
And you said it, you loved us. So it wasn't out of love.
I wanted what was best for you.
But how did that, it's so, yes, but at your expense. You just said you were lonely growing up.
Never thought about it in that way for you. I thought about giving you opportunities of not being, is it called a helicopter parent? A
Yes.
hovering parent? Yeah. Of not being that. I saw it as nothing but privilege. And make no mistake, not for your prep school, but for the schools you went to. Between your father and I think we visited 9 or 10 schools to try and make the right choice for you to go to a school that we thought was most appropriate for you.
But there's obviously deep love to send kids to a school for their betterment over yours, because most mothers would not want their children to leave at 12 years old. They want to hold their child as long as possible.
Well, there you're correct in that my background knew it, that you went to school. And, you know, in England, it was close by. It took my parents 2 hours to drive to see us, and they were allowed to see us every 3rd weekend. It was gentle and it was close. It wasn't the size of America. So, so I didn't have the sense of giving you up, or it was hard for me. I
But
really
I would argue
didn't.
that. I would argue as I sit here today, I would say that's not accurate. I would say what you did is out of love. You said, I want to put you in a better position over
Yes,
myself. So I
it was very
may
nice of you.
suffer from that. But the way I was told and brought up and everything was deal with it.
Did I really give you that vibe?
I'm saying that you had to deal with it. That
I
you didn't give yourself. That's how I would read that in this situation is that, yeah, it probably would be incredibly hard to have 4 boys, 1 boy leave, 2 boys leave the next at 12 years old. To not have them in your life, that would be hurtful. And what you're saying inadvertently is, yes, I did it. I did it for love. And instead of complaining to anyone or really opening up about it, I just said, deal with it.
I think you're putting a very kind spin on it. As I said, you go day by day. You make decisions. The decision was joint. I think your father seemed to say that the boarding school choice was mine. He had gone from Florida for 1 term to an East Coast school where it snowed and cried baby and came home to Florida. He hated it. He would have been he would have made so many friends and done absolutely fine. But we were in total agreement. Or he was letting me make more of the decisions at the time about that, I think.
Yeah. And again, I'm giving you credit. You're not taking it, but
I
I'm
know
trying
you
to
are.
say it's,
I'm getting brownie points. I'm not
it's
sure I
not.
deserve
I mean, it's
them.
just, it's as I ask you questions that I've never asked and try to understand something, that's how I would see it. Because I really believe any mother who's listening, it would never be excited to lose their child to a boarding school thousands of miles away at 12 years old and say, I get to see them 3 times a year and for a month at summer. That would sound like something difficult in any era.
Look what I've got now. I've got a lovely relationship. We moved so that the last years of our life are where, thank goodness you all live in one town. How lovely is that? I think we've got an honest relationship. We can say things. I'm a little prickly. I don't like being picked on. But we've got something magical as adults that most families are envious of us. We had an event at our house a few weeks ago where our friends, our neighbors, my golfing friends met you all. They all commented on how easy, how warm, how nice it was. And I thought, wow, there's nothing nicer than that.
Yeah. But it takes time to get there. It doesn't,
Well, I think you've forgiven some things and
yeah,
we've swallowed some things.
Yeah.
Well,
because it is the Alex Perry on Fire podcast.
Yes.
We have to know what fires you up every day.
Oh, I have 6 little things, I think. Maybe I don't know. Trees. I love trees. I love trees in all shapes. They do something. Scenery, cooking, travel, people in capital letters, golf. And of course, it goes without saying, family meals out where you do all the ordering for 10 or 12 people, but we have so much laughter. And I actually need to add the word laughter. I think you can get through anything if you laugh. I think if you can make each other laugh, all those things really, really do something for
I would
me.
agree. And I think that one thing that I will always remember from childhood to growing up to now is we do laugh. And I think there have been some hardships and craziness as any and every family have, but the ability to laugh. And I think that's what kept you together with Dad more than just
very
4
much
boys, is that at the end of the day, you could laugh at the stupid stuff he was doing. And it was pretty stupid.
Currently, he's married to the dog, but that's absolutely fine at this point.
It's been incredible. Honestly, I think that where our relationship has gone in a year because of the podcast, because of Elliot because of everything is special. It's truly special. I have more questions that I'll ask after the podcast, only because I do want to be inquisitive more. I do want to know more where you came from, because it's the only way for me to grow. So I love that you're open to it. And even though we don't say it a lot in our family,
I love you.
I do love you too.
I do. I always called you sweetheart, if you remember, which is an unusual thing to say to boys, but that was my way of saying I love you.
Need I remind you that was the only thing that, or person Dad were called sweetheart by.
But you doing the podcast and you being there like a brick for your brother, you've done more for me in the year that you've been doing this. Now it's my turn.
Well, I appreciate it. So that concludes this episode, but it was so special. Thank you.
So you're not going to give any money to my charity?
Hold on. The charity, we do give a charity to a charity
I'm your
of
mother.
choice. We do. We give it to a charity of choice. And unlike your husband, who I thought would give it to a dog charity, maybe you will, but please share who you will be giving.
There's a reason for it, because
Yeah.
I was involved from the get-go. Arizona Basset Hound Rescue has been around for 25 years. And knowing I was doing the podcast with you, I spoke to them this week. They have helped 2,300 dogs in 25 years. Any money that goes to them goes directly, and they are the most selfless, wonderful people. There are many other organizations too, but that one with the small amount, don't think you're sending them.
I smile
would be
because
so appreciated.
we actually will give them $2,500 to
that's
Arizona
absolutely
Basset.
Hound
And if anyone knows
Rescue.
our family, they know that Bassets are very, very special in our family.
Thank you for having me on.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Alex Perry on Fire. It means so much to me and the wonderful team that makes this all possible. I'm now passing the flame to you. Please follow, like, and subscribe so you can always stay up to date. Thanks again, and stay fired up.